Greetings and welcome to a new knitting and crochet podcast. My name is Zero. I am a knitter and crocheter who lives in Northern Virginia, and for the past 2.5 years, I have been posting about my knitting and my crochet projects almost exclusively on TikTok. Now, if you're aware of the current TikTok situation in the United States, today is January 18th. Things are still looking quite uncertain right now. Even if TikTok isn't banned, the platform itself will likely change. And I have been focusing almost exclusively on TikTok for a long time. You know, I've uploaded a couple of YouTube videos, but not much. And I've had an Instagram account for years that I rarely have posted on. I've focused almost exclusively on TikTok. And with the uncertainty of the platform in general, because they've been talking about banning it for years, it feels like the wise decision to branch out to other platforms. I always think of the scene from Avatar: The Last Airbender when Uncle Iroh is talking to Zuko about the elements and telling Zuko that if you only pull from, just fire bending, that your bending becomes rigid and stale.
It is important to draw wisdom from many different places. If we take it from only one place, it becomes rigid and stale. Understanding others, the other elements, and the other nations will help you become whole.
And I don't know why I think of that scene so often. It's a really good scene, but, just posting exclusively on TikTok, sticking exclusively to TikTok, once that is gone or once that has changed, what do I have left? So I'm branching out more. I'm starting a podcast on YouTube. I've started one before. I did about 3 or 4 episodes. This was nearly 3 years ago. And all of those videos are privated because I started getting attention on TikTok and I started posting a lot on TikTok and I neglected YouTube. So I am back and I am ready to talk about my knitting and my crochet projects. Right now it's mostly knitting, but I am excited to post more long-form content because one thing about TikTok is that you have to be very quick with it. You have to introduce whatever you're working on very fast, you have to grab people's attention fast, and you have to be quick in order to retain that information. It is a very fast-moving platform, and I just want to be able to slow down and talk about my projects. So I'm going to follow the typical format of what I'm wearing, finished objects, works in progress, as well as plans, and we'll see what happens after that. Right now, I am wearing the Lakes Pullover by Ozetta. I knit this in November-ish out of Malabrigo Arroyo in the Sur colorway, held together with Knitpicks Aloft in black. I love the way that, just different yarns pair with black mohair. Whenever I knit with black mohair, or just mohair in general, should have just said whenever I knit with mohair in general. Words are hard. But anyway, just knitting with mohair. I love adding black to different colors and different variegated colorways just because I don't know who said this, but someone mentioned a while ago that it's kind of like watercolor. For some reason, I'm thinking of Stephen West. Someone said that using mohair is kind of like painting with watercolors, where it's like you're putting a wash over it. And this is a very heavily variegated yarn, and there's definite pooling and striping. Can kind of see where I switched from one skein to the other, even though I did alternate skeins. But having like the black mohair wash over it really ties it together, and I just love knitting with black mohair. The hat that I'm wearing is a self-drafted 1x1 knit beanie, knit with the Fiberseed Sprout Dk and the Pooky Forest colorway. For the longest time after getting that yarn, I thought that the label that just said Pooky Forest was a typo. It's not. I think it's a hilarious name. I love it. And I love this yarn. I'm going to take this hat off for a second so I can show it to y'all. but it's just a 1x1 knit beanie. I believe I cast on 100 stitches with 3.75 millimeter knitting needles, and I got a little carried away when I was knitting this hat. I knit pretty much the entire thing while I was reading Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, and I kept doing the thing where it's like, I'll just read one more chapter, and of course when you're knitting and reading at the same time, reading one more chapter always ends up in, you know, it's not just a one more row type thing, it's you're knitting until you finish that chapter. So it just kept happening, and this is a very long hat. I did not intend for this hat to be this long, but with the length it's at, it works pretty much perfectly as a double folded brim hat. So wasn't really intentional, but it worked out great. And I've struggled a lot with knitted hats in the past because I'm not a huge fan of gauge swatching, and I'm not going to gauge swatch for a hat. So whenever I've followed patterns for hats in the past, my gauge has always been off and it hasn't fit properly. But with self-drafting your own hat, when you already kind of have an idea of what your gauge is with certain yarns, I just tend to get a better fit. So this is my hat. It's a Halloween colorway. I love me a good Halloween colorway. I just love Halloween in general. A majority of the stuff you see behind me is Halloween decorations. I don't know if these are not. I have the eyeball flowers, the purple ones that have eyeballs in the center of them, somewhere else on my shelf. I also collect, whenever, like every Halloween, the raven and crow statues from Michael's, and then this is one of my crow lamps. This one has a dimmer, so yeah, that's him. I love me some Halloween, but anyway, not to go off on a tangent. Finished objects. This is one of them. This is one of my more recent finished objects. This is a kind of finished object where I thought it was finished, but I tried it on and I think my sleeves need to be a little bit longer, so this is a finished object that needs to become a whip again. This is the Stripes, or what I like to call kind of the Stripes, by Andrea Mowry. And the reason I say it's kind of the Stripes by Andrea Mowry and not Stripes by Andrea Mowry is because when I was knitting on this pattern and I was doing the increases for this circular yoke, I had a concussion. So something happened in there where I just cognitively wasn't having a good time, and I wound up with an extra 100 stitches when I went to split for the sleeves and body. So I split a little bit differently. I did not cast on as many stitches in the underarm, so my sleeve stitch count was able to be pretty similar to what the pattern was. And I believe my body stitch count ended up being the stitch count for like a size 5, and I was knitting a size 2 or something, or a size 3. I think I was knitting a size 3. I don't know. A majority of this happened at the beginning of December. But I did decreases working down the body, but it is still like after I realized that my stitch count was completely off, I just put the pattern aside and knit. So my sleeves need to be an eensy bit longer, meaning that I will have to frog back my cuff ribbing, knit an additional purple stripe and a green stripe, and then add more cuff ribbing. So knitting with stripes can be a little awkward sometimes when it comes to length, because this sleeve only needs to be about a centimeter or 2 longer, and if I want the stripes to line up, I will have to add about 2 inches of length. It is what it is. The yarn is Queensland Rainbow Beach. The colorways are, this green is Heart Reef, and it is very similar to Spin Cycle in that it's kind of, can't remember what the plying is called, but it has that kind of hand spun look to it, and there are shades of purple and blue within the green, which meant that when I was knitting on this, striping it with this purple that I'll talk about in a second, I had to be very careful with where my colors landed and, you know, just planning out what I was gonna do, because if I got to a purple section of this green yarn and it was close to where I would have to transition for a purple stripe, it kind of just blended together and it didn't have enough contrast. So I had 2 skeins of this yarn and I had to be very careful with where I put them. This purple is also Queensland Rainbow Beach in this Scarlet Jezebel colorway, and it also has some variation, but it sticks pretty true to just purple. But I do like the way that this sweater looks. It's a very bright sweater, but it's purple and green, and I love purple and green. My hair is purple and green, although I have not re-dyed it in 6 months. I need to do that soon. But I really need to get a move on and fix the sleeves on this sweater so I can wear it. So this is my Kind of Stripes by Andrea Mowry. My final finished object is the Lovella shawl by Ambah O'Brien. This project was a bit of a doozy. I'm not much of a shawl knitter, and up until now I would have said that I have never knit a scarf, but this is one of those shawls that is just very long and narrow, so I would almost consider this a scarf. You start with this striping section over here, and the yarn I used is Knitpicks Wool of the Andes. If you have been following me on TikTok, you probably know that I love this yarn, but if you're new here, I love Wool of the Andes. This the colorways are Coal and Dove Heather, and I used the Dove Heather because I already had some in my stash that needed to be used up. And the way it looks with the black striped, it reminds me of the cover of My Chemical Romance's The Black Parade. So, fun little fact about me is that the little marching guy on the album cover, his name is Pepe, by the way. I had a picture of him printed out and taped to the back of my phone case with packing tape when I was in 7th grade. So I love that album, and I'm seeing My Chemical Romance in August. But back to the knitting project that just so happens to remind me of one of my favorite albums of all time. This project is kind of a doozy. You're doing the striping, so you're switching colors every 2 rows, so you're having to manage having 2 skeins of yarn connected to your project at all times, and then start all the way over here, and then you increase, and then you hit your center point, and then you begin decreasing, and then after a little while you start with this eyelet pattern. Can't really see it that clearly, but it's an eyelet pattern, I promise. And this is my new kind of scarf thing, because I knit sweaters all the time. I knit primarily sweaters, so every single winter I end up saying, now I could really use a scarf right now. I could really use something to keep my neck warm. And then I never knit one, or I never crochet one. I never make one. So I complain all winter about my neck being cold. Now I won't have to complain because my neck will be warm. I haven't really had the chance to wear this yet. I finished it last week, I believe, but it was a bit of a doozy to knit, but it is an appreciated project. And if you're a fan of knitting shawls and you want kind of a simple project, I would recommend it. But this is the project that made me decide that if I'm going to be knitting a shawl, I am going to stick exclusively with like lace patterns, because for a shawl, the striping is not enough to keep me interested, just with my own personal knitting taste. It is a well-written pattern though, and I do plan on knitting more of Ambah O'Brien's patterns in the future. This is what it looks like on with the, kind of typical wraparound way that people wear shawls, except I'm not doing this well. But it's what it kind of looks like, and can also be worn just as a scarf, or you can put it around your shoulders. It is, because of the shape of it, it is a very versatile shawl thingy, scarf doohickey. Come here, Pearl. Please don't knock down the tripod. Would you like to say hello to the people, Pearl? Yeah, there are people in there. I love this cat so much. She is one of my best friends. There is another cat in my room at the moment. We actually have 4 cats. I mostly talk about Pearl, and I'll mostly be sharing Pearl because she is my cat. Hence her name, Purl, like the stitch in knitting. But on my bed right now, we also have Sunny. He is a little orange dude, and I love him, but sometimes he feels like he is the bane of my existence. You know, he's an orange cat. He's gonna act like an orange cat. His sister is named Luna. She's a black cat because have you ever met a cat that, like, a cat named Luna? I'm just gonna assume that's a black cat. Like, it's just one of the black cat names. And then we have another orange cat. His name is Einstein. He rarely comes down here. So he stays in my mom's room a majority of the time or with my little sister, but he is definitely my mom's cat. There's also a dog, but I will let you know that if the dog is in my room, if Fenway is in my room, I'll put a picture of Fenway up. If Fenway is in my room, Pearl is not in my room. One last finished object that, you know, kind of goes into my one of my current works in progresses. Works in progresses? What? Works in progress. English is a difficult language, especially when it's 1 a.m. Have I mentioned it's about 1 a.m. right now? I'm kind of nocturnal. I had an occupational therapy appointment today, and then I slept for a long time afterwards. But this is another self-drafted beanie. It's 1x1 rib with the worsted weight yarn. And this is for my nail tech's brother. I've been getting my nails done for about a year now, and I have found a really great nail tech, and sometimes when he is not available, his brother will do my nails. But this is knit in Knitpicks Mighty Stitch in black, and I'm knitting a hat. I've knit a hat for my nail tech's brother. Of course, I'm also knitting one for my nail tech. It's kind of a thing. If you're nice to me, I'll knit you a hat. But also using Knitpicks Mighty Stitch in black. I figured this would be a good option for a gift knit hat because it still has a little bit of wool to help keep you warm, but you can also machine wash it because this is an 80% acrylic, 20% wool blend, and it's superwash wool. So I'm almost done with this. I think I have about 10 rounds left, or 8 rounds, I don't know, and then I can go on with the crown. I didn't mention the decreases I used on this one. I used a 4-point decrease, and it's kind of similar to the decreases seen in the Musselburgh pattern by Ozetta Teague, where you have the you have 2 stitches in the middle of your decrease stitches, so it's like a thicker decrease. With this one, it's just the decreases on either side. But hats. And it's kind of funny. I gift knit hats for people all the time. And I recently knit myself this hat because someone told me, you know, you gift knit hats for people all the time. How often do you knit hats for yourself? And I'm like, you have a point. So I knit myself a hat. Now I'm gift knitting more hats. But I am enjoying this project. I'm currently reading Monstrous Regiment by Terry Pratchett while reading it. And I love reading Terry Pratchett while knitting. It is one of my favorite things. So it's just a basic 1x1 knit beanie. I cast on 96 stitches. I'm using a 4mm knitting needle. I knit, and then I do a 4-point decrease. This is why I don't write knitting patterns, because let me tell you, it would be so simplified to the point where it's like, oh yeah, you would like to knit this hat? Here are 2 sentences on how to knit this hat. I am not meant to be a pattern designer, and I can recognize that. So I do knit hats without patterns because I can, and I found that those hats fit better than other hats. The stitch marker I'm using on this one, it's actually a little crow skull made out of resin. I bought a couple of these charms on Etsy a while back, and I just attached the little stitch marker thingies on here, and now I have little crow skull stitch markers for my projects. But working on a hat. I do have a Ravelry project page for the hat I'm currently working on. I stopped using Ravelry for a while, and now I'm going to try and start using it again because reasons. So I do have some notes in my project page for this one. But yeah, it's a hat. What else can I say other than it's a hat to keep your ears warm, to keep your head warm? Hat. Continuing on with the whips, it is now sweater time. I'm working on 2 knitted sweaters at the time, so it's time to talk about it, hence it being sweater time. I don't know. My first one is the Single Malt by Maxim. I have knit this pattern once before. I knit it out of Lion Brand Pound of Love, which is an acrylic yarn, and I am personally at this point not a fan of knitting sweaters out of acrylic yarn, just because one, with wool sweaters you don't have to wash them as often, and I have a lot of health issues, so washing my clothes like is sometimes very difficult, and I like to be able to wear a sweater more than once without having to wash it because wool is antimicrobial. But also, whenever I've worn acrylic sweaters, they feel like they're suffocating me. Acrylic isn't really breathable. I would rather wear a wool sweater in summer than wear an acrylic sweater in winter. It's just not comfortable for me. So I'm using wool. I'm using Knitpicks Wool of the Andes again, except this is the Superwash version, and Knitpicks has, every year they have their like $2, $4, $6 yarn sale where a lot of yarn gets very much so discounted. So I got this yarn during that sale and I paid $20 for the entire 10 skein sweaters quantity. So this is actually the Superwash version of Wool of the Andes. It's my first time knitting with the Superwash version, just because it's more affordable to knit with the non-Superwash version, and I don't mind hand washing my stuff. If I only have to wash it every once in a while, I'll hand wash it. I'm fine with that. But this is the Indigo Heather colorway. It's a very deep purple. Deep purple. Smoke on the water. It's a deep purple. And I like this color a lot. It's one of my favorite shades of purple. I have noticed knitting with the Superwash version of this yarn that it does split a lot more than the non-Superwash version, and I will show the sweater now because I've been talking about the yarn without showing the sweater. This is my sweater so far. It's coming along. It's sweatering. The yoke of this worked up very fast. I mentioned that I knit a majority of this hat. Actually, I knit all of this hat while reading Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. This entire hat was able to occupy my hands for about 300 pages worth of the book, or about half of the book. And then after that, I started knitting on this, and I knit almost the entire yoke while finishing Demon Copperhead. I love being able to knit and read at the same time. It is wonderful. So this yoke went by really fast, and I've been steadily working on the body throughout this week. I would like to finish the body this weekend, maybe. Today is Saturday. And we'll see where we go from there. I do really like this pattern. It is Single Malt by Maxim. And if I had to recommend one pattern, like one raglan sweater pattern, not only to knit for yourself, but to knit for other people, I would recommend this pattern because it fits so many people so well. It is size inclusive. The neckline shaping is just very flattering. It is a closer fit neckline, and I have a lot of problems with raglan sweaters, and just a lot of problems with sweater necklines in general because I have narrow shoulders and a narrow neck, so all of my sweater necklines tend to look like they're gaping out on me, especially with my raglan sweaters. I prefer to knit drop shoulder sweaters because when you're picking up stitches for your neckline, you kind of get a little bit more leeway with how wide your neck is going to be. But the neckline shaping on this is super flattering, and it is a broken seed stitch, I believe. It's what it's called. It's a knit purl texture, so it has some stretch to it. So with my narrow shoulders, it fits my shoulders well, but it also has that little bit of stretch for if you have wider shoulders. And it's one of those patterns, you can knit it for, like I said, any body. Works for man, woman, anyone. So I'm knitting this pattern for a second time because I liked my first one that was knit in acrylic so much, other than the fact that it was knit in acrylic, that I'm knitting it in wool. It also just looks super polished. Like, that is a very nice looking raglan increase. And the short row shaping is in the neckline ribbing. Just a very good pattern. I highly recommend it. But I I'm loving this project at the moment. It is one of those stitch patterns where you don't really have to pay attention to what you're doing when you're doing, or at least I don't have to pay attention to what I'm doing, but it still is interesting. So it's not plain stockinette. Every other round you're doing something different. So whether it be knit, knit purl, knit, purl knit, it's a good time. So this is my single malt sweater by Maxim. And this is also not my first project, but one of my first projects that I cast on using my ChowGoo interchangeable needle set. I'm using the 5mm needles on this one. And oh, my cat is playing with my phone charger. That's not good. But I received my ChowGoo interchangeable needle set for Christmas this year. After years of talking about this needle set and wanting to save up for them, like, I spent all the money that I had saved up, you know, with the intent of purchasing this needle set on My Chemical Romance tickets. And then I bought a new desk after I started saving up money again. And then I had to buy a new like, whenever I tried saving up for this needle set, I always had something different to buy. So my mom got me these needles for Christmas, and I'm loving using them. I have a pair of 5mm fixed ChowGoo circulars that I have just used so much that the cord of them is permanently bent. And if you know about like ChowGoo cords, they have this little wire in them, so they're not supposed to kink up or bend weirdly. But I don't know what I'd done to that fixed set, but I had bullied those 5mm knitting needles so much. They were constantly in use, and now they get a break. And now I get to harass my 5mm interchangeable needles. So, Single Malt by Maxim. Pearl, I spend so much money on cat toys for you. You have cat toys, yet you choose to play with my phone charger. I'd appreciate it if you could stop it. Thank you. You're very nice. I love you. My next project is the Favo sweater by Fibertales, and it matches my wall, and I love that so much. Before I actually show this, I just want to talk about this pattern for a second. When I got into knitting patterns and just knitting YouTube in general, one of the first podcasters I came across was Kat Weaver, then Heather and Hops, and she was a test knitter for this pattern, the Favo sweater by Fibertales, and I've been wanting to knit that pattern ever since. I think it came out in 2020 or 2021. It's been out for some time, and I have been thinking about what yarn I want to use for it for a while. And now I'm finally knitting it. It's one of my dream projects, and I have the first panel finished. It's wide. It has a lot of positive ease. But it looks so good, and you can't really see it all that well because the lighting in my room is not really that great. But it has this honeycomb brioche, which is just a joy to work up. Baubles, this is my first time working baubles. I don't know if I love baubles. I wouldn't go out of my way to knit more baubles, but they look cool. And then we have the kind of antler type cables here. And it looks wonderful. I love it so much, and it matches my wall. The yarn I'm using, I'm about to get sad in a second, but this pattern calls for a worsted weight held with a mohair. The worsted weight I'm using is, you guessed it, more Wool of the Andes from Knitpicks. This is Aurora Heather. This is my first time using this shade of Knitpicks Wool of the Andes. I've knit multiple projects using Noble Heather. I've knit multiple projects using Forest Heather. I've knit multiple projects using Peapod. Gotta knit all of the greens from Knitpicks. What can I say? And then the mohair. It's Knitpicks Aloft in Labyrinth, and they discontinued it, and I am still sad about it. It's been discontinued for a year now that I think about it. It's been discontinued for about a year. But before it was discontinued, I bought like 6 balls of it, I think, because it went on sale because they were discontinuing it. And I was hoping that they weren't discontinuing it, but they still discontinued it. And it's the perfect green. It is almost a black, but still very much so a dark green. And I love this color so much. I mean, I kind of have to love this color so much. It's the color of my wall, or at least my wall is now the color of this shade of green because I fell in love with this color before we lived in this house, and now my wall is... I love this shade of green. I love green, but they discontinued it, and I am sad. So if anyone knows any affordable dupes for Knitpicks Aloft in the Labyrinth colorway, mohair, you please just let me know. My bank account will hate you, but I will love you. But it's sad. This is the last I have of this colorway. I've knit 3 projects. This is my 3rd project with this colorway, and listen, if I find a colorway I like, I knit everything with that colorway. You're gonna see a lot of Knitpicks Will of the Andes in coal. I use coal a lot. That's the black. It makes sense. I've knit a lot of projects using Forest Heather. I will probably knit a lot of projects using Aurora Heather because, I mean, look at this green. How could you not love this green? I love green. Back to the knitting when I'm done, you know, currently lusting over green over here. I love green. I'm working on the back panel. The back panel has the same honeycomb brioche, and I haven't mentioned it, but these stitches here, the 2 stitches right here on either side that are also on this panel, and I'm dropping everything. Things are falling off of my lap. These 2 stitches right here, they're going to be a kind of braid thingy doohickey. I'm just waiting until I have finished with my 2nd panel to drop those stitches down and bring it up because I want to be able to use those plain stitches so I can count the amount of rows I have so I can make sure that the back and front of my sweater are the same length. My mohair is now on the floor, my wool is now on the floor, my yarn keeps falling on the floor. But the back of this sweater, it does not have the cabling and the baubles and stuff. Instead, it has reverse stockinette, and I do appreciate that. I haven't really gone too much in depth about this on the internet, but my body is not very good at this whole walking thing that most people can do. I've hit my head a lot. I've had 16 concussions, and that kind of messed up the part of my brain that balances. So I walk like I am drunk. And I also have epilepsy, and because of that, I can't feel half of my body sometimes. On top of that, I have spina bifida, so I just can't feel my legs in general sometimes. I also have a bunch of joint issues, and I've been using forearm crutches for years. A lot of the modifications that I do make to my sweaters, like I did make a modification to this Lakes pullover to cinch in the ribbing on the cuff so it wouldn't go over my hand. It's because I use forearm crutches to get around, but my forearm crutches are slowly destroying my shoulders. So I'm currently in the process of getting a custom fit wheelchair for anything that were to require me to otherwise be using my forearm crutches for more than 10 to 15 minutes because I'm just not good at walking. I've been through a lot of rehabilitation, like neurologically and stuff like that. My medical team has just decided that wheelchair is the best option moving forward. And, you know, when you're in a wheelchair, you got a backrest, and that backrest covers your back because it's a backrest. So having the reverse stockinette on the back instead of the cables, because it won't be seen that much. I mean, my backrest is going to be pretty low, but even then, you know, not putting forth the energy to do cables on the back of the sweater that aren't even going to show on the back of the sweater anyway. I appreciate that. So I'm working on my back panel right now. I'm using, again, my Chowgu interchangeable needles. These are 6.5 millimeters. I believe the pattern originally calls for 5 millimeter needles, but knowing my gauge and the called for stockinette gauge, I tend to get about 18 stitches. If you can hear chewing, Pearl's eating. Anyway, I tend to get about 18 stitches in 4 inches or 10 centimeters with 5 millimeter needles. So knowing that and knowing that the gauge called for in pattern in stockinette, for some reason I'm thinking it's 14 stitches. I don't remember what it is right now. All I know is I read it and I'm like, oh, that's not a gauge I will be able to get on 5 millimeter needles. So I went up to 6.5 millimeter. I don't measure gauge unless it's a test knit. I just go off of the sweaters I've already knit. So if I end up with a awkwardly sized sweater, that's why. But I'm working on the back panel right now. It's knit in sections, and my stitches are about to fall off of my needle. It's knit in sections. So you knit the front panel, you knit the back panel, seam them at the shoulders. I'm going to do a 3 needle bind off, which is why I have not bound off the stitches on my front panel. They're on hold. I'm going to do a 3 needle bind off once I finish with my back panel, and then I'm going to block it before I do anything else sleeve wise, just because it will typically increase in length, and when you seam a sweater it kind of stops it from doing that. So I'm going to block it before I seam the body sides, and then the sleeves are knit from the bottom up, and then you seam them around the armhole, which I'm not going to have fun with. I don't love seaming, but like seaming a sleeve around an armhole does not sound like my idea of a good time. But I'm working on this sweater. I'm looking forward to this sweater. The color is perfect, and I have been wanting this sweater. I've been wanting to knit this sweater for years, and now I'm finally doing it. Finally knitting one of my dream sweaters, and it's gonna be great. It's gonna be wonderful. It can't be anything other than great and wonderful. Like, this has to be a good finished sweater, because let me tell you, I'm knitting with the last of my Labyrinth. I love this colorway so much. How could they discontinue it? It's like, why would they discontinue it anyway? It's such a good color, and the color they replaced it with, it's kind of a pistachio-y kind of green, and that's the only shade of green they have now. It's like, as someone who loves green, a green connoisseur, if you will, you choose a pistachio kind of green as your only green colorway for mohair. Seriously. Oh. Sunny, behave. Please don't smack Pearl. Pearl, please don't smack Sunny. Cats, please don't fight. I love you. Behind my camera, I have my shelves, and Pearl sleeps on top of my shelves. Like, the top of the shelves is Pearl territory. She even eats on top of there. And she was eating, and then Sunny, the orange cat, was studying on top of the shelves, and now he's about to start eating, which is, I think, my sign to wrap it up, because you know that person that just insists on chewing with their mouth open, no matter how many times you tell them, hey, could you not chew with your mouth open? The sound is absolutely horrendous. Sunny is that kind of cat. He's that person in cat form. He just chews so loud. Like, he has woken me up with his chewing before. It is unsettling how such a small thing can chew so loud. Before I go, I would like to talk about a yarn acquisition and what will probably be my next cast on. Knitpicks had their luxury yarn sale, and I swear my bank account cries every single time Knitpicks announces a new yarn sale. Because I have a problem. But they had their luxury yarn sale, so their luxury yarns were on sale because it's a luxury yarn sale. And I got 4 skeins of Wonderfluff. I've been looking at this yarn for years, but I could never justify the cost. It's not an expensive yarn. It's $10 a thingy of yarn. But you know, I have a hard time spending $10 a thingy on yarn or whatever. I tend to, you know, prefer to knit with affordable yarns, but I've been eyeballing this yarn for years. It is a brushed alpaca type yarn. Very fluffy, very nice, and I've been wanting to knit the Lento? Not the Lento. Hold on. I was not thinking of the Lento sweater. I mean, I was thinking about the Lento sweater, which is why I said the Lento sweater. The pattern I was trying to think of, though, is the Varpu sweater by the same designer, Jonna Helin, also for Lina magazine. But so many people, I mean, like everyone and their cousins, monkeys, uncle, stepdog has knit a Lento at some point. It was very popular a few years ago. It's kind of like the sweater version of the Sophie scarf, if you think about it. Well, at least not as popular as the Sophie scarf, but like one of the sweater equivalents of the Sophie scarf. I want to knit a Varpu. That's my whole point. It is knit using a single strand of brushed alpaca with a 10mm knitting needle. So it'll be very lightweight and breathable, but still warm. And I have a Slugcore sweater by James & Watts that I wear all the time. It is one of my favorite hand knit sweaters. So I have a feeling that I will love this sweater once I knit it, which means that I really need to knit it. I also kind of want to knit it with a v-neck because I love v-neck sweaters. I know I have not given you much evidence, you know, to help y'all support the conclusion that I love v-neck sweaters because I've talked about 4 different crew neck sweaters, but I love v-neck sweaters and it is one of my goals for 2025 to knit more v-neck sweaters, and I'm starting off horribly by knitting a bunch of crew necks. I want to knit more v-necks. So I'm thinking of doing the Varpu, but making it v-neck. And once I finish my single malt, I think I'm going to cast on a Varpu v-neck. A v-neck Varpu. I'm going to love it, and I'm going to cherish it. It is time for me to wrap this up, I think, because my phone is screaming at me, telling me that I am very low on storage. And listen, I'm not willing to part with my gajillion different screenshots of different book recommendations or whatever that I've found. I've grown rather fond of them. I'm quite emotionally attached to them, and I do not want to have to delete my screenshots, so I'm not going to delete my screenshots. I'm just going to stop yapping to my phone. Also, I'm going to stop because it is about 2 a.m. right now, and I have a feeling that if I keep talking, we're just going to go completely off the rails, and y'all are going to end up knowing a lot more about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein than you really want to know about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Because, listen, once it hits a certain hour, I just start talking about anything to anyone who will listen. And, you know, you want to hear about Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, Terry Pratchett's Discworld, Dostoevsky, The Wall by Pink Floyd. I love The Wall by Pink Floyd. Crows, I like crows. Obviously. I have a little man standing there in the background holding the light. I'm gonna go. If you are interested in finding me elsewhere after this, I'm on Instagram. I'm on Tumblr, I'm on Ravelry, links to which will all be in the description in my Linktree doohickey. I will also have my TikTok link there. Whether or not it still works depends on whether or not TikTok is still a thing. I don't know. The future is uncertain. As Tobias Forge said, the future is a foreign land. When it all burns down. Also, if you have stuck around for this little yap sesh, I thank you very much. If you have made it this far, please let me know what knitting projects or crochet projects or whatever projects you're working on while watching this video, because I love knitting and watching knitting podcasts. It's like I said, it's like a stitch and bitch, like a virtual stitch and bitch. So I'm gonna go. I thank you all very much, and that's it.